What's the deal, everybody? Welcome to On Location with me instead of in the studio, and that means I will be giving you an on-site tutorial. Today's tutorial, a video walkthrough, simple video walkthrough, using the Insta360 ONE RS 1-inch edition. Now, I promised you this in my last video. This is going to be a really simple process, and let's go ahead and dive into it. All right, now before we get started, let's go over a few things that I'll talk about the camera itself. We will be using this, but it will not be extended. We're gonna keep it down, nice, low and tight, fold the handle up, and this is how I'll be using it. The next thing I'll tell you is you can walk like this, but it's a little more difficult in my opinion, since it has the automatic horizontal and vertical tilt, so it doesn't matter what way the camera sits. I find it much easier to walk like this because it puts it a little bit lower, like all of my videos usually are, but I don't have to bend and crouch in the process. So this is the number one tip. Number two tip is whenever you're filming with this, the side that the screen on is the side that you would naturally want to keep in front of you because you want to see what's going on. But the Insta360 is typically a selfie cam for stuff like this, so the screen side is always the front facing side. Now in post you can rotate everything around very easily, but if you want to save yourself a little bit of time, point the screen side out while you're recording. All right, now one more tip to give you before we get started is before I start my video tours, personally I like to walk around, turn on all the fans, and turn all the water on low, because it just really highlights the fact that everything works and it throws a little bit of extra motion in the videos. All right, for my next tip, let's go ahead and open up all the doors and turn on all the lights of the property. Front door and rear door especially, because we'll be walking straight through these things for the actual tour. So now that we have all the fans and faucets on, all the lights are on, all the doors are open, there's only one thing left to do, and that is get to it. Now, I will go into my studio and tell you about all the settings while I play the video I create right now. All right, let's jump right into these settings. But before we do, let me once again thank Insta360 for sending over this camera to me. I'm allowed to make these reviews and make these videos. They have no say-so in my final video, and all the opinions and workflows I talk about are my own. Just wanted to reiterate that fact before continuing. Now, first thing I'll talk about this camera is that I actually shoot everything in full auto mode for these videos. Generally speaking, when using other cameras or even when using this camera in specific shot scenarios, I'll switch over to manual mode and take advantage of having all that control. But with these very basic walkthroughs, I want the camera to do as much work as possible for me. I don't want to think about changing white balance or exposure on the fly while moving around, so auto is the best way to go in my opinion. As a matter of fact, I can't even imagine doing that without any cuts. Next will be the actual capture size that I'm using, and I do 6K 30 for these walkthroughs. They do have options for something more like a traditional 1080 60 frames a second, so you can slow it down in post. But in my experience, you don't really need to slow these videos down because they're already long and slow enough because they're a real walkthrough experience. You really want to take advantage of those extra pixels in scenarios where you want to go from a more wide-angle fisheye shot to something resembling a traditional camera with less distortion on the ends. All of that can be done in the Insta360 software on your computer, so shooting at the highest resolution and taking advantage of those features will serve you well for these types of videos. Log or vivid for the color mode, you already know what I'm going to pick, but actually you don't, because I'm picking vivid. In most other scenarios shooting real estate, I'll always choose log on my camera when given the option to increase my ability to correct on the back end. But once again, keep in mind for these videos, I want to do as little adjusting as possible on the back end. That being said, I shoot in vivid and not log mode. You can shoot in log and the colors are okay, but I honestly think the colors look better in vivid even after post-production with this camera in particular. So if you're asking me, ditch the log shot for this type of video and go straight with vivid, so the camera's literally handling everything. Last thing to cover for these internal camera settings for shooting these videos is the sharpness level. I've tried all of them, and I believe medium is the best for my personal workflow. I've tried this scenario in low, and even though you'll notice in my post-production process a little later that I reduce the sharpness and then add more at the end, but it still looks better to me than shooting in low and just increasing the sharpness. I'm not sure why this is, but again, medium seems to be the best sharpness in my opinion. Stay away from the high mode because these types of videos, it will really accentuate the grain pattern in those low light rooms. Now, let's jump on over to the computer so we can get a look into the very minimalistic post-production workflow for these videos. You can do these entirely with the Insta360 software, and that's what I'll be showing you first. Insta360 does have an integration plugin for Premiere Pro, but as a Davinci Resolve user, I'll be finishing my videos off there. You don't require this last step of Davinci or Premiere, but it will greatly enhance the look of your final product with a minimal amount of extra input on your part. All right, everybody, here we are at the computer, and it's time to get into the actual computer. So I'll switch over to some screen capture. First thing I'm going to pull up is the Insta360 software. You should already have this downloaded and installed, obviously, before starting this procedure. Next thing I'm going to pull up are the actual files we'll be working on. Now, you can pull these directly from the drive or the device itself, but I store them on my computer to make it easier. You'll also notice that it comes with 3 separate files, and these are all kind of a little bit different. But what I've noticed about the Insta360 app is that you can pull them all in together and it creates one cohesive unit, and everything stores within itself. And I'll show you exactly what I mean right now. I'll grab all 3 and I'll drag it on over into the 360 Studio. It'll do all of its loading, and here we go. As you can see, it remembered all of my spots before where I've done all of my little keyframe markers. So if I press play right now, you can see exactly what it looked like and all that jazz. If you give me just a moment, I'll go ahead and clear all of this stuff and we'll get right back into it. All right, so now we're all cleared out and ready to go. Well, I'm going to dive on into the computer screen and show you a few things before we start. This is the only one over here that I want to talk about, and it's the Color Plus 2, or the Color Plus and the Aquavision 2. Now, I believe this is automatically turned on usually when you first install this software, and I turn it off for real estate in particular because it does look cool for stuff on the exterior. You can bring down the strength a little bit if you want, but for the interiors, when you start moving into rooms with multiple bulb temperatures, it really does some funny stuff. And that's no fault of the camera. It's just literally because that's what happens when you go from fluorescent to LED to incandescent right after each other. So I leave that off because it's basically like a huge saturation boost. And if you've seen my videos before, you know I'm like a saturation minimalist, or at least I try to be these days. So that's the only thing I wanted to show you to start with. Now, before you can actually start editing anything on here, you have to apply at least 1 keyframe. So we'll go all the way back to the beginning, and this plus button right here is how you apply keyframes. It even has the hotkey right underneath it if you prefer to use it. Keyframe. This will bring up all of your little menu items that you will be using the entire time. There are a few that you will use the most. Now, before we get into it, let's talk about the 2 views that you will have to decide between right in the beginning. Do you want the ability to have a fisheye and wide angle look when you go into tight rooms, or do you want it to be more of a natural view, like a natural regular camera? I would say make this decision before you start editing because it'll help. Now, I personally, with these videos in particular, like the fisheye-ness to it, because if I want them to order something with a traditional camera, I want them to order my nice high-end video. So I don't use natural view for these videos, though you can if that's what you like. I use the default view. Default comes on 60 right here. Now, this is the one you're probably going to be using the most because it has to deal with the fisheye-ness of the lens, for lack of a better term. So if you see when I move this back and forth, you can see exactly what it does. It takes a lot of the distortion out of the images. So this one right here and this one, the pan access, is the one we will be using the most throughout this entire editing process. And keep in mind, for this video, I'm not actually going to edit this entire video because you've already seen what it looks like, and that would be pretty boring. So I'm just going to take you through the beginning, and then I'll take you through my Davinci Resolve at the end. So let's dive in. Let's reset these settings over here, and I'll tell you about the numbers I use the most down here. I use 15, 25, and 50. Those are the numbers I like to use the most. 60 I think is a little too wide angle personally, so I usually start around 50. But since we're on the exterior, I'm going to keep that 50 because I want to show as much of the yard as possible. And I'm going to start off by putting my pan this way a little because there was an old junky car in the driveway and they couldn't get it moved for the shoot, so it's just there. You know how it is. These things happen in real estate, so we just keep rolling. I'm going to try and avoid that for the homeowners as much as possible. Now, pressing the space bar will play, or you can move it along however you want. I'm going to press space bar and let it move in. Now, I'll give you some tips when it comes to placing these keyframes. You want There is no easy ease, or at least none that I've discovered yet, like you have in Premiere Pro or Davinci Resolve, where you can kind of stop the harshness of the move back and forth. So I like to give big spaces and breaks between my movements. So I'm gonna wait until we get all the way over here, kind of close to the front door, if you will, because I know I pass it up right here. I'm gonna add another keyframe, and what it's gonna do is it's gonna slowly go from keyframe 1 to keyframe 2. So as I make my adjustments here, you'll be able to see, I'm gonna move it back this way a little bit, and I'm gonna bring it in a little bit tighter as we go to hopefully keep that car out of it. So we'll go back to the beginning and press play, and you'll be able to see exactly what the keyframe movement does between the two. See how it will automatically rotate slowly this way as I go, because you're going to be adjusting the pan access this entire time. So now we've hit this one, we're going on in like this, and then as soon as we come on into the front door, like right around here, I'll add another one, and I'll slightly adjust this so that way the front door is nice and level. And then if you want to see that again from back here, you can see it'll go this way, and then it'll slowly start adjusting back the other way from the next keyframe. And that's all I'm really doing for these videos, is keyframing back and forth. Now we'll go on inside, and as you can see, up the stairs, no reason to adjust here. I will tell you, whenever you're about to make an adjustment going into a door, let me show you, it might be easier this way. So if I was to, let's say I get to this door, I'm turning left because I want to be in this room, right? So if I put a keyframe here and adjust into the room, what's going to happen is it's going to take the distance between this last keyframe and this first keyframe, and it'll start slowly turning left as we walk into the room. You'll see what I mean. See how it's slowly going left between the two keyframes? That's not what we wanted to do. So I'll remove that last keyframe. We'll go to the same spot where I'm about to turn, and then right before I turn, so let's see, right around here, I'm gonna put another keyframe. So that way, now when I'm walking into the house, it stays nice and level. And now when I walk into the room right here, put another keyframe, spin it to the right. Let's see, we're gonna have to move this out a little bit to like right there. There we go. Bring this here. Then we'll grab our keyframe, spin it to where we want it to be. Now the movement will be just between those two keyframes. So it'll allow us to keep going straight until we're ready for the camera to move left, just like that. As you walk into the room, it moves left. Now I'm gonna do this. See, you can see me right now because I haven't placed the keyframe from when I hit the corner of that room yet, and that's just how I walk around this one. Hit that keyframe again, make the camera adjustment just like before, and I'm gonna widen this out a little bit just to make the room feel a little bit bigger. And this is why I prefer to start on the default mode, is because I end up using a little bit of this fisheye throughout the process just to make everything look a little bit bigger. That's too much. Let's go down to 40. There we go. 40 is a good number for this right now. Now, whenever you see, I'll come in the door, keyframe 1 tells it to start moving in. Then the next keyframe will keep that rotation going, and just like that, nice and smooth motion, we're all the way back in. As we come in right here, we'll keyframe once again because we don't want the camera to start slowly turning left when we're moving forward. Then we'll keep going forward, and right here, you can tell I'm in the hallway because there I am. If you want to see my face, there I am concentrating very hard. Where's the camera? Oh yeah, it removes itself. So here we go, put this back to 0. We're gonna flip this around, and keep in mind, whatever way you spin this camera is which way the camera is gonna spin in the video. So if you move it to the left, it'll move to the left. You move it to the right, it'll move to the right. Just be cautious, because sometimes you can move it all the way around, and then I'll show you what that does, which is no bueno. See how it just spins? So that's what you have to be cautious of. You don't want it to do that. So go back to the same place. We're gonna make that key mark, and we're gonna make sure it just spins the way we want it to be. And we're going straight for that bathroom in this shot. So that's where I'm gonna line up, and I'm gonna start bringing out a little bit of that distortion as we do so. So now we've got this, it'll make a nice turn to the left and slowly push in a little bit. And then as we get into the bathroom, I'll put another keyframe, and I'm really gonna zoom in a little bit so that way you can really focus and see that. I have noticed that whenever you're using this, once you get past 10, things start getting a little more pixelated because you're pushing in so far. So I tried and avoid going past 10, and here we go. You'll be able to see exactly what that does. As we move in, the camera also pushes in, and now you can see that room perfectly. We back out, I put another one. Then as we go into the room behind right here, we're gonna put another one and spin the camera back the way it goes, just like that. And we'll open it up a little bit more also. So there we go. We'll go back to 15. That's a good number, I like. And there we go. So now you'll see, we're gonna turn left. Once again, we're gonna zoom in slowly to the bathroom as we go. As we exit the bathroom, we're gonna put one more keyframe, then it starts turning into the bathroom, and boom. As you can see, this is a pretty rinse and repeat process, but I've showed you in a matter of how long we've been doing this, 3 minutes, maybe 4 minutes. I've already done, actually, we haven't even been doing that long, 2 minutes, and I've done all this because I've been talking for 4 minutes. So if I was to just rock and roll, we'd already be done with all this, which leads me to the export process. Now, one thing to remember is that you can't actually export these without audio, which I think is kind of funny. Maybe that's something they'll update in the future. So I believe you can turn the audio off in the camera if you don't want to hear anything. I haven't really messed with this yet because I bring it into Davinci Resolve, as I said earlier, but I'll show you the export process from the Insta360 app. Export right here, and you can see I already have my settings saved just like I like them. Since I'm bringing it into Davinci Resolve, I want the most amount of information there possible. So you can either export in H.264 or H.265, but what I'm gonna recommend is ProRes 422. It's gonna give you the biggest file with the most amount of information, and that's gonna make it automatically select the 4K export, which that's what we want, right? We want all of that information, or as much information as physically possible. So this is how I actually export all my files. Now, if you're not gonna bring this into Premiere Pro or Davinci Resolve, I would recommend just go ahead and doing the H.264, H.265, whichever one you wanna do. I guess H.264 is probably a little better for an instant upload or something like that. But once again, if you're bringing it into an editing software, ProRes 422, press the start export button and it'll start exporting. You'll have a little line pop up over here, and as soon as it's done, it makes a little dun-dun noise, so that way you know it's done. I'm not gonna do that because I've already done that. And so if you're not gonna bring this into any other editing software, you're done right now. Delivery time, rock and roll, that probably took you a whole 6 minutes to edit. Now I'm gonna show you how to enhance that edit a little more. I'm gonna use Davinci Resolve, so if you're a Premiere user, I'm sorry, but these will all still work for Premiere, but I'm gonna show you how to do it in Davinci Resolve. So I'm gonna close this guy out, close this out because I don't need it anymore, and open up Davinci Resolve. Well, it looks like I'm editing something else in Davinci Resolve. Give me just a minute. And here we are. We are back in Davinci Resolve. Now, I don't do much except for remove the audio. If you haven't used Davinci Resolve before, this is not going to be a tutorial on that. You can watch some of my other videos where I dive deep into the whole Davinci Resolve background. I'm going to assume you already know that information, and I'm going to go straight over to, first of all, I remove the audio and replace it with some nice little music in the background. And then we're going to go straight on over to the color tab because I think that's the most important. Well, not the most important. While we're on edit, let me show you this. I throw an adjustment layer right up here, and this is for when the camera first goes from interior to exterior, and I'm basically just bringing down a lot of the stuff because whenever you first move from inside to outside, it has to do that little catch up for the auto processing. So I do a little help on my end just to make it look a little bit prettier. Now, to the color page, here we go. There is not much to do here. There we go. Now you can see my entire node build out. I'm going to turn all of this off so you can see the difference before and after, and I'll go over generally what everything is right here. primaries. That's my first node. This is where I do all of my color adjustments and my shadow and light and dark work. Not much of it is required with this camera, but I do a little bit. Let's take everything off so you can see exactly how we go step by step. So this is it straight out of the camera. This is my primaries. Oh, look at that. This was set for a different house. Obviously we got to bring these down a little bit. There we go. So, and we got to bring our darks down a little bit. Let's just go ahead and do that together. There we go. That looks good. Now, after I do some primary adjustments, I mentioned it earlier, this is where I'm going to come back through, and the first thing I do is throw in some unsharpening, or I'm going to de-sharpen it a little bit, which doesn't make a whole lot of sense for now, but it will later. It's because it helps remove a lot of that little tiny grain that can happen from smaller sensor cameras like this. So I use this and I remove 3%. So it comes at 50%. If you go up, it makes things blurry. If you go down, it makes things sharp. So I bring this to 53 personally if shooting on medium, because this is reducing it just a little bit. Then I do my denoise layer. This is going to get rid of a lot of that grain for me in Davinci Resolve. And if we go over here and check out my settings, I use a pretty generic setting when it comes to this. 5 better small, 10 roughly 15. If you press this button right here, it will allow you to unlink these numbers just in case you're having issues with that. Over here, we're going to enhanced, large, 15, and about 20. Those are the stats I use for this camera in particular. I find they work really well for the grain pattern that's created through especially the darker rooms inside. Next thing we're going to do after our denoise layer is our resharpen layer. That's right. Now that we have taken away a lot of the sharpness and then removed a lot of the grain, we're now going to reintroduce some sharpness. And I usually put this to about 48, 47, something like that, because you don't want it to look too much, but you want to just reintroduce a little bit of that sharpness you just took away from the unsharp mask and the denoise layer. And the very last thing I'm going to use is dehancer, because as you all know, I am a huge dehancer freak. If you watch my other videos, you know, you can also put in some layers that will remove yellows and remove purples and blues and stuff like that. But I personally believe that's all overkill and you don't need it for these videos, especially for what they are. Keep in mind, like I said, these are being used as just a simple walkthrough video to replace something like a 360 tour. So this is a much cheaper product than one of those videos you would go into hardcore detail about all of those things. And just like that, dehancer, resharp, denoise, unsharpen primaries, and we are done. That is our entire grade. Export this guy out and you've got it made in the shade. As always, keep rocking and rolling, enjoy what you're doing, like and subscribe, all that jazz, make smart business decisions, and check out one of these cameras. It's opened up this whole new field for me of these walkthrough videos, and they seem to be very popular amongst agents because it's a little bit cheaper than a 360 tour and looks better and less confusing for most people to watch. So if you're interested on how to use this camera for a 360 tour, the first one I'm going to be doing is matching up with Kula, and you can check that out over here. Or if you want to see an example of the traditional cinematic videos I make, you can check that out over here. Catch you next time. Boom.